So I think what the president has told us to do is use this MOU to sort of refill the world's oil economy,
Yeah.
to refill some stocks, and then to see where the hand is. And, as I've said this repeatedly, if the Iranians are willing to make the commitments that we would like them to make and are willing to back those up with verifiable milestones, then we are going to change our relationship with Iran. And if they don't do that, then nothing has really changed except for what we've already accomplished from the military campaign.
Imagine you're in negotiations to buy like a house or a car, and the negotiations are getting kind of heated. There's a lot of back and forth discussions about terms, and you're basically coming up with a framework for coming up with a price. There's a lot of back and forth about the price, about the terms, about the financing. There's all sorts of discussions going on. It gets very complicated, and you're basically, you set a 60-day deadline to come up with the deal. You are negotiating in good faith. You're really interested in this house or car or business or whatever you're buying. And then you turn on your TV or go on the internet one day and you see the guy who you're negotiating with, and he's basically on like some show, essentially talking about you, trash talking you, saying that he doesn't trust you and he thinks that you're going to rip him off, and that you're basically stringing him along and seeing what you can get and seeing how you can rip this guy off. That's essentially what happened over the last 24 hours or so with JD Vance getting on a podcast and essentially ripping the entire premise of the Memorandum of Understanding to shred, raising suspicions about Donald Trump's motives, about the Iran deal, essentially saying that we're just stringing the Iranians along. I'm Borzou Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at Borzou, borzou.substack.com, or you can find me on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or especially on YouTube, where I'm really brushing up my operations there. So if you could have a look over at YouTube, perhaps consider subscribing. I would really appreciate that. Just hit the follow button or the like button, maybe make a comment, share a video. That would be really awesome. I don't know if I've ever really read Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal, but I don't know if there's a chapter in there about, like, in the middle of negotiations, go on TV and start talking about how you're trying to rip off the person that you're making a deal with. Listen to JD Vance speaking on the right-wing podcasters show, Michael Knowles. This guy is a kind of a shady right-wing character who's also on Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire network, this essentially Israeli psychological operations platform. Listen in and hear what he said.
There are a few things that we want. We want durable commitments that are verifiable and backed up by inspections that Iran will denuclearize their entire country. Okay, we're going to see how we get there. Number two, we want to see what kind of an arrangement actually exists in the Middle East between not just Iran and the United States, but the GCC, Israel, Lebanon. We're going to play that situation out. And then on the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, I think you actually said it well, which is that the strait is open in the sense that to oil traffic, we're seeing more oil come out of the Strait of Hormuz. And some days, actually, more oil coming out of the strait than came out before the war even started. So there's this element of the where the world oil economy is kind of getting back into gear. That's going to take a little bit of time, but you've already seen the prices come way down. Now, what the cynics will say is, well, if you look at the number of ships that are trafficking, that's actually down from the pre-war start. But they're mostly talking about cargo ships and other vessels. At least so far, what we've seen is the oil traffic has reached its pre-war height. So I think what the president has told us to do is use this MOU to sort of refill the world's oil economy, to refill some stocks, and then to see where the hand is. And, as I've said this repeatedly, if the Iranians are willing to make the commitments that we would like them to make and are willing to back those up with verifiable milestones, then we are going to change our relationship with Iran. And if they don't do that, then nothing has really changed except for what we've already accomplished from the military campaign, which is a lot. Right. So we kind of have two options here. We have the option of pursuing a long-term deal with the Iranians, but that requires a significant change in their behavior. We have the option of banking our wins, and then, of course, doing things on top of that if the president feels that we have to. And I think both of those options are very much in play, and the president's going to let this play out. But what's happening right now is he's letting those options play out in an environment where there is significantly less pressure on the world energy economy. And this is my biggest frustration with right-wing critics of what we've done over the last few months in Iran, is that they don't realize how completely they were losing the political argument because of what was happening to world energy markets.
Yeah.
So what the President of the United States has done...
You're talking about the critics who want more bombs dropping on.
Their attitude is just drop bombs and drop bombs and drop bombs, and they can't really articulate to what end. And what the president is saying, I'm willing to drop bombs, and he's clearly shown that he's willing to drop bombs, but only if it serves an objective. And so what he's doing right now is taking a lot of pressure off of the world economy, the world energy economy in particular, while not giving up a single one of his gains and while preserving a lot of optionality. I think that's a very good place for us to be in, but there's uncertainty because no one can be certain what the Iranians are going to do.
So this guy is basically feeding into every fear that the Iranians have. That basically these negotiations are for naught, that essentially the Americans are just building up their stockpile of oil and other minerals, as well as replenishing their weapons supplies and getting ready for the next round. So this is not going to do wonders for the Iran negotiations, for the deal. I think there's every possibility that JD Vance is just tailoring his message to whatever he thinks the audience wants to hear. That's just the kind of vapid person he is. And it's quite possible that he was essentially telling Michael Knowles and the people at the Daily Wire what they wanted to hear. Oh, no, don't worry about it. We got the Iran base covered. When he was on Megyn Kelly's show, who's a little bit more of a paleo-conservative drift, he had a very different message. He was basically saying that, no, we want out of this war and we're negotiating in good faith. So I think there's that very real possibility. Just as the Iranian negotiators, when they're on TV, they speak to different audiences. When they're speaking on state television, they might say something that they wouldn't say when they're speaking on Al Jazeera. But in any case, what he is saying here, what JD Vance is saying here, is exactly the fear that many Iranians have. And I want to just emphasize that I've been observing and watching Iranian media over the last few weeks, and they are prepared for this. This is one of the possibilities that they have in mind. And this is why, for example, they're not going to open up the Strait of Hormuz totally. If you look at these numbers, they're really not great in terms of the number of ships that have passed. This is from the New York Times. The number of ships that have passed the Strait of Hormuz is still nowhere near the pre-war high of around 130 ships per day. What JD Vance is doing is ensuring that with this comment, with this kind of commentary, with this kind of trash talking, is ensuring that they're going to essentially prevent more ships from going. Iran is going to be even more on alert and more on guard about the possibility that this is in fact the American plan all along. They're getting ready, they're moving military equipment, and there's reports, credible reports, that they are moving lots and lots of military equipment to the Eastern Mediterranean, specifically to Israel, since Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are a little bit more sensitive right now. And those could be it could just be replenishing the stuff that's already been gone. It could be a substitute for CENTCOM, which has been wiped out essentially from Qatar, or it could be preparations for the next round of war. And I think that the Iranians are very much ready for that. And this is why they're going to prevent ships from leaving through the Strait of Hormuz. This is why they're going to have their fingers on the trigger the whole time. And this is why this kind of commentary will undermine the goals of the Trump administration, which is to get the world economy back on track. Even as the price of crude oil has gone down, price of gasoline in the United States has not gone that far down. And we still really haven't felt the full effect of the oil shock that was caused by the disruption of oil supplies starting in February. And that is still yet to come. So yeah, maybe he feels like he needs to make commentary like this in order to appease the Ben Shapiros and the neoconservatives, to kind of keep them on side, keep the MAGA base from cracking apart even more than it already has. But in this particular instance, this video, this clip that has gone totally viral and has gone all over is not going to help the U.S. cause in many respects. Iran still remains a hot topic, even as I've been trying to explore other subjects as well as Iran. And as a matter of fact, in the next few days or so, perhaps after the 4th of July weekend, I'm going to post a very good, a very long interview that I did with a Libya expert about what's going on in Libya. There's been some moves and movements there. Please stay tuned for that podcast. That's going to be an incredible interview. And I will just put that up as soon as I can after the holiday weekend. But as for today, last night I was on France 24's The Debate with my good friend Francois Picard, and we talked about Iran with a panel of guests. I took some select clips of my commentary. If you feel like watching the whole show, I'll put a link in the Substack newsletter. Thank you so much.
Let me begin with you, Borzu. These preps for the funeral, how is it being painted, and how much will this moment matter in the?
I don't think it's going to matter a lot. I think it's a necessary ceremony. They weren't able to do a funeral for him, really, not with a lot of pomp and ceremony during the war. But in many ways, and even pro-regime people acknowledge it, the smartest pro-regime people, his time has already passed. And the mantle has already been passed on to a new generation, not just his son, who has not yet appeared publicly, and we've only not even heard his voice yet, really, but also to this new generation of leaders heavily focused on the Revolutionary Guard, a little bit more relaxed about cultural issues, apparently, and a little bit more nationalistic, jingoistic even. And so his time has already passed. There have been some really smart people who I've talked to, and I've asked them, like, is this going to mean like a harsher period of rule for the Islamic Republic? And they've said kind of coyly, not necessarily, because many of the problems in Iran were because of one man, and that one man is gone now. And so you will see a little bit more creativity in the leadership's ability to operate and function and perform change.
What do you mean by creativity?
Just a little bit more inventiveness, like, for example, allowing the kids to rollerblade around Tehran and not worrying about that kind of stuff. A little bit more creativity in foreign policy, not being so adamant about which countries they'll partner with and which countries they'll make deals with. For example, there was this long-standing taboo that was imposed completely by the Supreme Leader about not talking to the Americans directly, this absurd thing about no meetings between Americans, no one-on-one meetings unless he approved. And now those one-on-one meetings are more and more happening. And that's something that was frustrating for many people, including the Americans. And that taboo has been lifted, for example.
This visit by Iran's foreign minister this week to Iraq, which has a new government. Again, you heard Kian saying that that's going to get mixed reviews in Iran?
I don't think so. I think that having spent a lot of time in Iran and Iraq, including in Karbala, which is flooded with Iranian pilgrims, I think there's just a disconnect between a certain exile and understanding of Iran and the Iranian nation and the people and the actual salt of the earth in Iran. There's a large underclass of people who are very pious, and they go to Karbala and they go to Najaf and they go on these pilgrimages, and there's tour packages. This is the highlight of their year sometimes. So I think despite the Iran-Iraq war, there's a lot of sympathy between Iran and Iraq. They also disagree that they have to import people from Iraq and Lebanon to fill the crowds. They astroturf Khamenei's support. They tried to pretend that there was a cult of personality around him. This was the most uncharismatic person in the world. And the reason why there were so many people at Khomeini's funeral in 1989 was because he was actually a charismatic person who had a real cult of personality around him. Khamenei's cult of personality is almost entirely fake. He didn't speak well. He was not really adored. It was just a kind of artificial support for him, kind of all around. But yet he was a cleric, a senior cleric, and he was a marja taqlid. He was a source of emulation for pious Shia. And that's, I guess, the selling point for some people in Iraq as well as in Iran.
We saw back in January, after a week of the internet shutdown, they can't keep it shut for long. After all, the economy can't run without it. Continued. What does that tell you?
That the regime is determined to stay in power, and that it saw the internet as a security threat. On those sanctions, I just want to say that there is actually a kind of test case that you can look at how the effect of sanctions impact society and civil society. Between 2013 and 2017, there was the Rouhani term, and there was the easing of sanctions under Obama and the JCPOA. And what you had in Iran was the launch of startups, a lot of internet companies, a lot of the internet companies that are there now, like the equivalent of the Uber that's in Iran, or the Amazon, the platform for shopping and so on. All those launched during that period when the sanctions were eased, when the economy was doing a little bit better. And you also had a flowering of civil society there, youth culture. That's when this TikTok generation that took to the streets in 2022 for the women, life, and freedom movement, that's when they arose. And then when Donald Trump came and imposed maximum pressure, sanctions were up again, the economy was strangled again, you had basically a shutting down of that phenomenon. No more startups, no more interesting things happening in civil society. So I think that actually you give a little bit of economic breathing space to the country. Yes, of course, there's corruption. I lived in the Middle East for the last 25 years. I don't think there's any part of this whole region that's not completely corrupt thoroughly. But still, people make ends meet. They try to do the best that they can. And when there is these sanctions, that crushes the middle class and it prevents a flowering of civil society. If in retrospect, based on the experience of the last 15 years or so, if you want the people to rise up, if you want a civil middle class society to emerge from the ashes of the Islamic Republic, I think it probably would be better if the sanctions were eased.
There's the Europeans on the one hand, who've also offered their services in helping to demine the Strait of Hormuz and reduce tensions there. We had the visit of the Sultan of Oman here to Paris this week. Over in Doha, those indirect talks have just concluded. It's anyone's guess how indirect they are. The U.S. Vice President JD Vance telling journalist Sohrab Amhari on the plane returning from negotiations with the Iranians in Switzerland that channels were opening. This is what he said. He said, quote, they were like, talking about the Iranians, okay, fine. We'll send somebody from the IRGC to go hang out in Doha with somebody from CENTCOM, and that's how we're going to settle a lot of these disputes.
The problem is that for the Europeans, they've basically sanctioned themselves out of leverage over Iran. And they're also making deals with the most gory, most awful regimes on the planet. So I don't think that they have a lot of credibility, especially when you look at how cozy the Europeans and the Americans are with Israel. So when they talk about human rights, people just ignore them at this point. So it becomes about power and about interest. And that on that level, the United States and Iran can engage, and the Europeans and Iran can engage. Although on the level of even interests, the Europeans have made so many mistakes with regard to Iran that basically everyone ignores them. And this whole issue about the demining and so on, even the Americans don't take that seriously, much less the Iranians. So I think that the way forward at this point is to just let Iran be. And if you want to talk about its human rights record, its horrible human rights record, do so in a way that's not hypocritical and weaponized in a way that is supposedly aimed at helping the Iranian people, but really aimed at covering up the crimes of other regimes in the region. So I think that that would be helpful for the Europeans and Americans. That would be a course that they could take. But when it comes to interests and hard power, this is right now the only, at this point, sadly, the only way that there can be any kind of progress with regard to Iran relations.
Hey, this is Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube.